Okie dokie, lemon pokey. I'm going to show off my landscape. The landscape is painted in the process method and sculpted in the process method, and this texture you see over the landscape tiles is for the following effect. So there's a couple things we can do here. Let me turn down green. It actually is sculpted in base green. So whatever you paint, it is sculpted in green. So I'm lowering the terrain right now, and I can increase that with a value of green, and that'll raise the terrain somewhat, still lower. So I'll just increase the green, increase the alpha a little more. Eventually it's going to start getting higher. There it is. It's going to start having a lot more bumps. Every one of these pixels you see in here, every one of those pixels has two vectors to it. So that tells you exactly that it's 1,000 by 1,000 landscape that I'm sculpting with. If you've ever sculpted on a landscape, you probably didn't get to sculpt this much of a 1K landscape this quickly. So that means that my landscape is a shit ton faster than all the other landscapes. And the sculpting goes by a whole lot faster. If you've ever sculpted on a landscape, what I'm doing is massive. So basically, I'm using a shader actually for the sculpting. So back then I was using a geometry made with GDScript for the sculpting. The reason why I'm not using C#, not because I'm not a C# fan. I used a lot of C# in Unity and CryEngine. But GDScript is connected to C++, and I've used a lot of C++ in Visual Studios and in CryEngine. So for me, I like to be squarely seated in C++ because of the memory drag that C# can have. So GDScript has a tunnel that goes back to C++, and that tunnel means that it doesn't hold. It might have more memory, let's say overall, than C#, but it won't keep the memory. It won't have glue on that memory. So basically, so to speak, it can get rid of memory a shit ton faster than C++. I mean C#. Of course, C++ is always going to be a step ahead in speed. But that's regardless. This is meant to look very bumpy. Now I'm about to start painting. So one of the painting, I have more than one, by the way. One of the painting methods I'm going to use is I just want to paint squares. So if you want to just paint squares, you can do that. Every little tile you can paint squares. Of course, that's not ideal for a landscape, but that's the beginning of the landscape. Now you can see that the texture that overlaid the tiles is now overlaying the grass. So this is my second point. So you have an infinite number of squares you can paint. On top of that, you can paint on top of that. So basically, this allows for you to get a general idea of what you want to paint with normals and with whatever you need. And then the shader itself, you can paint around the grass and all that other stuff. So like if you want to blend sand with grass, you have a bunch of squares, you can have a bunch of squares and blend sand with grass, and there's not a billion fucking shaders compiling at the same time. Thank you, Unreal. But that's my point. So 1,000 by 1,000, if this was 4,000 by 4,000, this would have took about the same time, a little longer, and that depends on how I'm doing my circles. So I don't have circle draw implemented right now. Let me just get off of this. This is the player, so to show that while it's even done in the process method, look at all those bumps, by the way. In every vector, there's two vectors per pixel, so you can clearly see that. While it's done in the process method, sculpted, painted, and saved in the process method, if you don't want to use it for the process method, you don't want the player to use it for the process method, you just turn off edit mode. Okay? And that just goes back to the player mode. Okay. If you don't want the player camera, I'm going to get rid of it before it even hits the asset library. That's just an example. All your camera has to have is current on. Your camera, the only thing it needs on is current. Because this camera doesn't have current on, and it is set via script, and its movement and all the other stuff is set via script. Okay. Height maps, we have those. We can utilize any number of colors for height maps, but green is generally the rule of thumb. If you don't like green height maps, that's fine, it'll take white. Making it extremely versatile, because I'm going to have different viewports set up for different domains. So for X, Y, and Z, they'll have different domains to sculpt in X, Y, and Z. If you're wondering what this big-ass piece of shit is, this is actually the tile board for painting. Excuse me for saying piece of shit. And this big thing is for painting, so you can have any number of textures in here. And this is just for the 1000 by 1000, so this would be 4 times larger when we get to 4x4s. Okay, and likely you will not need anything bigger than 1000 by 1000, because you'll just scale it. One more thing to mention, it's not set off to the side in the corner. Your scale scales from the center, making it a lot more versatile than before. Always, always, always will be scaled from the center. So if you have an island in the middle and you need it to be a little bigger, just scale it and it'll stay in virtually the same place and scale normally like every other object should have from the get-go in the last 20 years. Sorry, I'm venting. Another thing is this landscape can double as an ocean. Always, always, always will it be able to double as an ocean. And that's because it has no collision. You might be like, well, how am I going to play with my player if it has no collision? I'm going to make a node that interacts with the landscape, and so when the player's walking on the landscape, it gets the next few vectors, and it will be able to walk across the landscape, so you never have to worry about processing double collision and meshes all the time, like every single time that's ever existed in all of humanity. And I don't know why we haven't done this method more often. And it doubles as an ocean because all you have to do is tweak the material settings in the landscape. So basically I'm going to have export value for material settings on whether it is mud, whether it is water, and wet area. So the landscape itself will have a wet area. So if you want to add water to the landscape, you can do that. So it can actually be a co-landscape. So it can be an ocean and a landscape, and when you walk over the water in that area, you'll start to sink into the water. So like if it's sandy water, you'll start to sink a little bit underneath the water, like it's supposed to be. Sorry for venting. But anyways, that is my version of a landscape, TwistedLogic Dev Landscape. Head dev, Joshua Blackman. Head of department, Justin Blevins. Head artist, Justin Blevins. And basically, it's ran on a few shaders, and it can be incrementally changed. So even all these scales and sculpts can be incrementally changed without affecting player's footing. So like if you wanted to add stuff here to make the waves move, you can do that in 2D now. You can do that, and you can also, and then it won't affect where the player lands either, so you don't have to adjust for that at all. And same thing for here. You can add a shader in a corner somewhere here if you want water. So I'm excited about this project. That's the best I can do in 10 minutes, guys. Sorry, I can't share all the features of the landscape in less than 10 minutes, but that's all I'm allowed to do.